Interviewing the wife of Dr. Abdul Qadeer Khan, widely regarded as the father of Pakistan's nuclear program, would be of significant historical and human interest. Questions might span from personal to political, touching on her insights into his life, beliefs, controversies, and legacy. Here are categories with the questions the world might be interested in asking. We're going to touch on the personal and family life first, then on his nuclear work and legacy, third, his public perception and controversy, and finally, personal views and reflections. So, with no further ado, I welcome Ms. Hendrina Khan, wife of Dr. Abdul Qadeer Khan. So, let's get right into it. Question 1. What was Abdul Qadeer Khan like at home, away from the public eye?
He was very much a family man. He loved cooking. When we were in Holland, he used to cook every weekend, and the children loved it. They got their first introduction to Pakistani dishes that way. He also loved animals, especially cats. We always had a cat in the house. Yeah, he was very much a family man. Whenever he was not in university, he was home. And in the beginning, the first few years, we had a very simple life. So that's when we set the pattern for the future.
Okay. So I would like to ask, how did you and Dr. Khan meet, and what drew you to him?
I was at that time working at the Pakistan embassy, while my parents had a tobacco and souvenir shop. So he came in from one of his trips. Every weekend he would take a trip somewhere and bought postcards, and then asked my father how much postage stamp to put to Pakistan. My father, of course, didn't know, so he called me. So I went there and then spoke to him. What I saw immediately was a very homesick young man, whose face lit up when I asked him whether he wanted stamps for East or West Pakistan. I could see he thought, wow, here's somebody who knows the difference. Then he stayed on and we chatted and talked for about an hour before he was due to catch his train back to Düsseldorf, where he was doing practical at that time. So my very first impression was one of a very homesick young man. And that was it.
I actually have a follow-up question as your granddaughter. I remember Opa talking about canned goulash and eating that for dinner, and something about you guys putting all your money together and all of that. I would like to hear more about that, please.
That was in a later phase when he had moved to Berlin to the university. And I went to Berlin to join him there to get to know him better, because we both thought, well, if there is to be any future together, we need to know each other better. And at that time, I had a very primitive room where I was not allowed to cook or do anything. So we used to use the hostel kitchen, and he used to cook every day. And one of our favorite things was tinned goulash with rice. And there were German students, Iraqi students. There were 7 students on that floor. And the German always used to come in and tease us and says, "It smells of dead bodies here." I know it was all in fun, so we didn't take it seriously. But so that was much later. That was in the Berlin time.
So leading up to that Berlin time, were you two sending letters to each other? How were you staying in contact and, getting to the next steps of your relationship, that is?
Yeah, well, that was in the beginning, the first 9 months when I stayed on in Holland and he moved to Berlin. Then we used to write every day about just everyday things and trying to get to know more about each other.
Okay, I'll go back to the planned questions now. How did his work affect your family life, especially during the tense years of nuclear development?
We had been married for 12 years before we came to Pakistan. So in that time, we had built up a specific relationship and a way of interacting with each other. We had the 2 girls by then. When we came here, that totally changed. He used to leave early in the morning, come back late at night. I was on my own, no transport in the beginning, no friends, school system unknown. It was very difficult to adjust those initial years. So I would not only describe the later years as difficult, but those initial years even more so. Another factor being that there was very little available at that time. For instance, no toilet paper, no tissues, no proper brooms. You had to clean the floor with a jaru, that sort of thing. And that's what I found quite difficult.
Valid, very valid. So, was he ever afraid or anxious during the years he worked on the nuclear project?
No, he was always very confident and hopeful that it would succeed, despite a lot of anti-propaganda that was going on even in Pakistan. In the early years, the first 2 years, not from abroad because they weren't aware of the program. Later, in the years of house arrest, he sometimes said to me, "Oh, we should never have come." But that was under severe stress, so I never really took it seriously.
Thank you. So this is the last question for the personal and family life section. So did he share his thoughts or struggles with you during international pressure and sanctions?
Because we had a very close relationship in our first 12 years of marriage, he discussed everything with me. In those early years, we also went to all the various places where he had activities going on. And not only we as a family, but he would invite the other families as well, so that to foster the team spirit. And I think that worked very well in the long run, because they turned out to be a very good, close-knit team.
Thank you so much. That was great. Okay, now we're going to go straight into his nuclear work and legacy. Number 6. How much did you know about his work when he was developing Pakistan's nuclear capabilities?
Not being a nuclear specialist, I didn't exactly understand all the ins and outs, but he did keep me informed at the level that were going on and difficulties they were having on getting imports from abroad and things that were then stopped on the way, or embargoes or that sort of thing. I was pretty much up to date in everything.
Okay, so what do you believe motivated him to push so strongly for Pakistan to become a nuclear power? What was the biggest motivation behind all of that?
The biggest factor was the fact that India had unannounced and against international intentions exploded a nuclear device. And he always felt that as long as Pakistan didn't have something equal in nature, Pakistan would never be safe as a nation. Having said that, he felt very strongly that it should only be used as a deterrent. It should never be used as a weapon as such.
Lovely, thank you. So this question number 8 is very interesting. How did he view his legacy? Did he see himself as a hero, a scientist, or a patriot?
He was very patriotic, and I knew that we were at one point were going to come to Pakistan. But he always said, I will only go back if I feel that I can do something useful for the country. And that, I think, was the motivation for him throughout, because he felt he was doing something useful. And the thought that he achieved what he came to do sustained him during those difficult years of the house arrest.
Thank you. So, number 9. What did he think about the global criticism of nuclear proliferation and his alleged role in it?
That was very difficult because not only was all the negative propaganda going on from abroad, but there was never any counter-reaction from Pakistani side. There was never any attempt at all of any sort of explanation or denial or anything of that sort. And that he sometimes found very difficult to acknowledge and accept.
Let's just silence your phone a little. Yeah. Lots of messages coming in on AQ Khan Day, huh? Shall I help you? Just here. Yes, perfect. Now silent.
Oh, I was just.
It's all right. It's AQ Khan Day. It's to be expected. So, thank you for that. Very profound response. Number 10. How did he respond privately to being placed under house arrest in 2004? And privately, that is.
Yes, where do I start? Those few first days leading up to the house arrest, he more or less felt what was coming. Ever since General Musharraf became army chief and later took over the power, there had been an antagonism between them. They never really got on. The fact that he accepted being a scapegoat, he knew what he was letting himself into, even though our lawyer at that time was very much against it. The only thing was that it was made to him with certain promises by General Musharraf himself. And under those conditions, he agreed to hold that speech for TV. No sooner had he made the speech, within 3 days, as a matter of fact, General Musharraf immediately started saying, oh, but it's only a conditional pardon. The conditions were that it was a full pardon and that house arrest would only last a limited time and that there would then be complete rehabilitation. There was never any talk of it being conditional to anything else. So that made everything even more difficult for him. What hurt us both very much in that time, and still I find very upsetting, is that despite the fact that he agreed to being the scapegoat, the questioning afterwards, not only he but his whole team were treated like traitors, and that it was not just a simple debriefing of the main people in the play, or whatever you want to call it. They were really treated like traitors, and that is a very difficult fact to deal with.
I do have a follow-up question. As his granddaughter, I remember a story about Opa. Opa means grandfather in Dutch. Opa was taken into questioning, interrogated, and even drugged. And I remember he was very uncomfortable about that because he's always in his senses, and he always had flying colors on his risk assessments. You know, he didn't really get stressed by anything. But drugging him, I remember that story. I'd like to hear about it.
Yeah, it wasn't actually drugging him. He had noticed that whenever he came for questioning, they gave him a glass of 7-Up. And he had also noticed that despite the stress and the tension of going for questioning, he always felt very sleepy, very not quite as alert as he normally was. And so after a few times, he just put 2 and 2 together. There was never any confirmation of it, but he did feel that they were lacing the 7-Up with something.
Thank you. Let's take a short break.
That's not a known fact, by the way.
I know. Okay. So light on? Yeah, we're recording. Okay, so now we're gonna go into the second half of this interview where we touch on public perception and controversy, and then finally your personal views and reflections. So, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about your husband?
Obviously, first and foremost, the proliferation thing. And then also the accusation that he stole documents from Holland, which never did. So those are the 2 main misconceptions.
Yeah, so there were a lot of rumors about Opa, my grandfather. I also hear about the blueprints a lot, that there were these blueprints and they were stolen and all this. But actually, I remember you saying something about professors and the ones he reached out to in that time, and they all confirmed your side of the events. Can you please elaborate?
Yeah, first of all, as far as stealing blueprints are concerned, it would have been impossible because of the security at the factory in Almelo where he worked for 3 weeks. As a matter of fact, where he worked was a container set outside the main building, so the people who came temporarily never actually accessed the building. Secondly, the case in Holland was based on obtaining secret literature, while what he had asked for was already published, but he didn't have his own books. All our stuff was still in transit. To prove his point, he got declarations, certificates, officially statements saying that what he had requested was already in the public domain, and they actually quoted sources. And on that ground, that case was finally dropped, not only on technical grounds.
So I would like to ask, how did our family cope with the international allegations of nuclear technology proliferation?
It was a very difficult time for us, especially since whatever you said to counteract was negated abroad. They believed what they wanted to believe, and our government, of course, did nothing at all to counteract those beliefs. I think it suited their purpose beautifully.
Thank you. And was he ever truly free after the fallout from the proliferation scandal?
He was never actually free from house arrest at all, even up to his death. There were always limitations put on him, like, for example, he was never allowed to go anywhere, even by invitation, if there was a government official present. They just did not want to see him as a publicly recognized figure. And that continued right until the end, always under the pretext of security, but of course we knew differently.
And did he regret any of his actions later in life?
In the time of house arrest and under great stress, he sometimes used to say, "We should never have come." But of course, when you're under stress, you do say things you don't really mean. I think on the whole, he was always happy that he had come and that he had achieved to do what he came to do. That meant a lot to him.
So now we're going to go into personal views and reflections, and these are your views. So I do have a few questions that are not on the list that I would just like to ask, ranging from, the official astrologer at the time of his birth and his birth chart, then partition, and then, we'll just start from the birth chart. I heard that there was a prophecy of some sort. Could you elaborate on that?
At the time of his birth in India, it was customary to have an astrological chart made. So his mother had one made for him too. And in that, the prediction was that he would travel abroad, that he would publish books, and that he would become well known. Since it was a court astrologer who made the chart, there was quite a bit of importance attached to it, even though we didn't know the exact text until much later in Pakistan. We managed to have it translated because it was all in a very official old style Hindi, which very few people knew how to translate.
Thank you. So, another personal question. So, he actually walked the border during the time of partition. Could you please share his experience during that walk and perhaps the train?
He was 16-year-old when he migrated from India to Pakistan. All his brothers were already in Pakistan. His mother stayed behind for some more time, came later, and his father, who was old and retired at that time, did not want to come. He stayed on in India. So he traveled with a family who was also going. The first part in train was all right, except that they were not treated very kindly. And one thing he felt very bad about was that a fountain pen given to him by his brother, who was working in Saudi Arabia at the time, was taken from him on that train journey. The last part, actually crossing the border, they had to do on foot. Now, I can't remember exactly what he said. I think it was 4 or 5 kilometers. During that time, he carried his tin trunk with all the possessions he had on his head. It was very hot. His chappals broke on the way and they were tied together with string. And for him, as a 16-year-old, it was a very strenuous journey, memory of which he kept with him his whole life.
And have you met his family members, such as his father and his mother? His father and his mother, do you remember meeting them?
His father I never met because he passed away in 1957, and I only met my husband in 1961. His mother I later met in Karachi. So there was never any problem with her, thankfully.
Yeah, she was very happy to have you in the family. A foreign daughter-in-law, yeah. So I'm gonna go back to the plant questions. Do you believe the world judged him fairly?
A very short answer to that. Definitely not.
Thank you. And how do you want the world and Pakistan to remember him?
In Pakistan, it's no problem because they know what he did and they appreciate it for him for that. In the world at large, one would hope that with time there had been more clarity and more projection of who he truly was and what the real story was. But unfortunately, that never materialized.
And Oma, I'm sorry to bring this up, but the Times article, The Merchant of Menace, please talk about that.
I'd rather not. That picture was horrible. It was demonic and venomous. That's all I can say about it. He wanted to keep the magazine for the sake of record, but I was more upset about it than he was, actually. And after his death, when we were sorting through things, I actually destroyed it.
Yes. And you said that the team members had been all questioned and put in solitary confinement at various points, I remember. And I'd just like you to tell me, why do you think they were all put in solitary confinement and, asked questions?
Yeah, first of all, my husband accepted full responsibility because he was asked to do so for the sake of the country. Being patriotic, he fully accepted that, even though our personal lawyer was greatly against that decision. That decision was taken with the promise, personally, from General Musharraf, that after that the house arrest would be only for a limited time. He would then be fully back into public life and things would carry on as normal. Unfortunately, that never happened. Within 3 days of making that statement on the TV, General Musharraf started saying, oh, but the pardon was only limited and it wasn't a full pardon, it was only conditional, which was never mentioned to us.
Would you say that he was scapegoated? A scapegoat for proliferation?
And definitely, he knew that. we knew it would be a difficult time. What we hadn't counted on, that he and his colleagues would be subsequently treated as traitors, and that we found very hard to deal with. That I still find very difficult to deal with.
Thank you. Back to the last three questions. What would you want young scientists in Pakistan and beyond to learn from his life?
First and foremost, that nothing can be achieved without honesty, hard work, and dedication. And then he also felt that education was very important. Without education, the country can't progress. So that's the gist of it.
Thank you. And if he could have changed one thing about his life or career, what would you say that would have been?
He would have gone into education. He was always hoping at some point to become a professor in his field of study, but to teach. His father was inspector of schools, so he was brought up in that whole atmosphere of education, and that is what he had ultimately hoped to achieve, but his career took him elsewhere.
And I remember Opa telling me about a job offer right at the time of Zia's project coming into fruition, the starts of that he was offered a job in Nigeria, actually. Was that at the same time?
No, that was much earlier, before he started his studies in Berlin. He was very homesick. He had spent 6 months in Düsseldorf doing a practical course, which is very hard because early hours and then learning the language at night. So, and being homesick, he really didn't feel like carrying on with a long study, which at that time was supposed to be 5 or 6 years. So he accepted a job offer in Nigeria as a high school science teacher. When he informed his professor in Berlin, he came down to Düsseldorf to meet him at the station once, and he talked to him, and the professor told him, if you give up your plans now and become a teacher, you will regret it the rest of your life. He took this seriously and decided to go to Berlin after all and proceeded from there.
And Oma, I seem to remember he was studying this whole time. So who was making money? Who was working?
Who was what?
Who was working? Who was making the money?
While he was in Berlin, his brother supported him. After we moved to Holland and got married, I worked and he studied, so I supported us both.
MashaAllah. Okay, so the last question. What was the hardest moment for you during his public and private struggles?
The hardest part, of course, was dealing with the whole issue and everything that surrounded the house arrest, the unfairness of it all, and the fact, as I said earlier, that they were being treated as traitors. That was the most difficult of everything for both of us to accept and deal with.
Well, thank you so much, Oma, Mrs. Hendrina Khan. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.